Hi guys, welcome to the fifth tutorial of the Webdynpro for ABAP um, tutorial series. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about different kinds of context node mappings that exist in Webdynpro for ABAP, and we'll also talk about component reusage in Webdynpro. How do we reuse the events and methods that we create in one component inside another component? Okay, so what I've done for this tutorial is I've created a table with the name ymovie, which basically holds some Oscar 2012 data. Um, so just for some application data, right? So I've entered some entries for the best actress, best actor, and best picture. So we're going to access the data of this table inside of application, and then I've created a component with the name example underscore 04. So it has one view and one window, and in the component controller I've created a node with the name Oscars, which is linked to the ymovie table that I've just shown. Okay, and then I've checked the interface node checkbox, which means this node can be accessed from other components. All right, and also I've checked this input element external checkbox, which makes this node available for external context node mapping. That what we're going to discuss. Um, so coming to the view layout, so we have one table which is linked to that Oscars node, right? And then I have a button, which is the name of the button is trigger event, and I have an action handler for that. Okay, so what is normal context node binding and what is external context node binding? We'll see that now. So we'll create a new component to demonstrate that. Yes. What I would say component usage, and I'd say Windows 6. Okay, and view 6. Okay, okay, so just activate it. Now what we'll see first is what is a normal contextual binding. So I'm going to create a node in component controller, and this will be normal context node. Okay, this will refer to structure ymovie, and will have a cardinality 0 to n because it needs to hold multiple records. And I'll say add attributes from structure, so I'll just select all the fields, so I have the node created. And then I'll go to the view, and I want to display this, so I'll create a table. Okay, I'll insert element, and I'll say table 1, and I'll say table, yep. Okay, um okay, so now if you see here, table doesn't have any columns. It says table does not contain visible columns, uh, because we haven't binded that to any of the data source. Basically we need to bind every UI element, almost all the UI elements to some node or attribute in the context. So because table holds multiple records, so we need to bind it to a node which has a cardinality 0 to n, and we have just created that. No, we haven't created it, right? We haven't created in the view. So no, so the one way is I can just create a node here and then bind it to the table. Now the other way, which is normal context binding, is so I have a node in component controller. So can I use that inside my view controller? Yes, you can. That's what the node binding is. So what you need to do is just select this node and then drag and drop here. That's it. See, it's very simple. And you can see an arrow icon here, which means that it is mapped to a node in the component controller. That's what the arrow indicates. And also you can see in the properties of the node the mapping path. So this particular node in the view controller, view context, is mapped to, for example, 06 component controller and normal context node. Right, so that's what it means. So now we have mapping done. Now I can use this node to bind the table UI element. So I'll go back to the layout and say, you can do it in several ways. You can just right click on this and say create binding. It'll pop up this binding window, and then you can select the context. So I have this normal context node from the view controller. I've selected, and then that's it. So now you see you have columns here. Now how do I fill this table? Okay. So I'll go to the component controller and go to the method. As I've shown in the hook method tutorial, the component controller init method gets called initially, right? So I'll just write some code here in the init method of the component controller to data, sorry, lt underscore tab type ymovie t. I've created a table type with the ymovie t. Okay, so select star from ymovie into table lt underscore tab. Okay, I love this code suggestion feature in new ABAP. Okay, so I've selected the table data into an internal table. Now I need to bind that internal table, pass that internal table data into this context node, right? Okay, I'll do that. Now you don't have to write the code here. There's something called code wizard here. So what you have to do is you go to the context tab here and then say set, because it's a table, cardinality 0 to n, it's a table. So as a table operation, I want to set this particular node with the values that I've extracted from ymovie table. System automatically generates all the code. So what you need to do is you just need to replace this particular internal table that system has created to your table. So I've extracted the data into LT tab and I'm just passing it to the node. Okay, that's it. Now the question is, the context node which I'm filling here in this method is not the view controller context node. It is a component controller context, right? But then the table UI element here is binded to the view context node, right? It's binded to the view 6, the node defined under view 6, not on the component controller. But still it works because we have done a mapping there. So when we do mapping, what happens is this is the source node for this target node. So if you fill in this node, the data gets automatically transferred to this node, and then when the data comes here, so it is binded to the UI element of table UI element, so it just appears in the table. So this is the normal context node binding. You do binding between the context nodes of the same component, but then exist in a different controllers. Okay, so let's create an application and see how it appears. Bingo. So I have the data displayed in the table, right? So just to summarize again, so what we have done here is we've created a node in the component controller, and then we mapped that node to the view context, and in the component controller in the init method we've written a bunch of code to fill in this node with the table values. That's all. So this is a normal context node binding. Now, if you want to do external context node mapping, so external context node mapping, as the name suggests, it's basically a mapping between a node of a component to a node of a different component. So we do map between nodes of different components, not in the same component as we do in normal binding. Okay, so how do we do that? Before doing the mapping, we need to first uh, declare something called component usage. So you double click on the component and you have a table where you can enter the component usages or the components which you want to use inside your component. So I'll just you can type in any name here. You can type xyz, it doesn't matter. So I've just selected use component, and then the component I'm going to use is example 4. Okay, good. I'll save this, and when you save it, there is one extra tab that appears here which has component usages, right? So this is the used component. Okay, and under that you'll see the interface controller usage. Okay, I'll just activate it. Okay, now what does it mean when you define a component uses? That the component interface that belongs to this component can be used inside the example 06 component. And so okay, before that I'm going to create another context node inside the component controller. Okay, so I'll say this external context node, and it will refer to the same structure, and the cardinality will be 0 to n, and I'll select from the structure, right? Okay, bingo. Okay, so we have a node which we can do external mapping. Now to do the external mapping, I'll go to the interface controller usage. Okay, now this interface controller is coming from the example 04. If you see the interface controller of example 04, this is the node that is you're seeing in 06 component here. Okay, now I want to map this node to one of the node in example 06. To do that, there's something called controller usage. So if I click it here, it pops up the component controller of the current component I'm editing. So I'll select this. Yep. So in the right side you can see the component controller. So we have normal context node we created earlier, and I just created external context node. So now to do the mapping, as we did for the normal context node mapping, you can just select this node and then drag and drop it here. Okay, now you can see here there is a double-headed arrow compared to the single-headed arrow we saw in the normal context node mapping. So the double-headed arrow it says that it is an external context node mapping. Okay, so what we have done, we have mapped a node inside the 06 component component controller to a node that is part of example 04 component. So this is external contextual mapping. We're mapping nodes of different components. Okay, I'll just activate first. Okay, cool. Now how do we demonstrate how this acting works? Basically, theoretically what should happen is if I fill in this node here somehow, okay, so the values in this node will get transferred to this node, but then this node is binded to the layout this node is binded to the table element in the view 4. So somehow I need to display this view inside the view of component 6, right? That's how I can check whether this external mapping is actually working or not. Now WebDynpro has a way to do that. There's something called view container UI element. Okay, I'll just insert a view container UI element, view container 1. So what it basically does is you can embed another component views inside this view container element. It's basically a container to hold views of another component. Okay, so I will also create an button. Okay, button 1. So button. Okay, sorry, it's there. Okay, so I'll say external context mapping, and I'll give the action handler as button 1. Okay, okay, done. So now, as I said, to test this mapping, what you need to do is basically, if you can um, yeah, fill in this node here, right? Because this is mapped to the interface node. Now in the view, the problem here is from we cannot access that context node from the view controller. So what I will do is basically I'll map this node to the view. Okay, yes. Okay, so what happens now if I fill this node in the view, because it's mapped to the component controller, the data will pass on to the component controller, and because this node is mapped to the interface node ASCARs, it will go and fill in the table UI element that we created in component 4. Okay, yeah, sounds a bit confusing, but once we do the coding and see the result in the screen, everything will be clear. So I'm going to write some code in this action handler. Okay, so it's the same thing. I'll create a data. Sorry, type ymovie t stuff from ymovie into table t underscore tab. Okay, good. Again, I'm going to use the code wizard here. Set table operation. I'm going to fill in the external context node of the view, which is linked to the component controller context node, which is linked to the interface controller context node. Okay, I'm going to replace this with lt tab. Okay, done. I'm going to activate this. Okay, before we go to the browser, there's one more thing we need to do. We have to embed the interface view. So we created view container view element, right? So in order to see this table from the component 4, what we need to do is we need to embed the interface view. It's basically the window of the component 4. So the set shell will display the used component that I've defined at the beginning. So I will select the window 4 from the component 4. So the window 4 is there. Okay, and I'll activate this again. Okay, let's refresh the screen. Okay, so I have a new table now. So this trigger event button is coming from uh, the component 4, so don't worry about it. This is the button we have created, and this is the table that that is coming from component 4. Now once I click this button, Okay, you can see the data. Now let's see what happens when I click that button. So that button is defined in view 6, right? This is the button. Now it has action handler called button 1. Okay, if you go inside the code of the button 1, we're extracting the data, and then we're binding a node called external context node in the view. Because we did a mapping between these two, data gets passed to this node. And because in the interface controller usage we did a mapping between component controller node and the interface controller node of the component 4, the data gets passed to this AskCars node. And because AskCars node is linked to this table here in the component 4, if you see the AskCars is linked to this table, so the data gets displayed here, and that's what you see here. So this table here belongs to component 4, not component 6, but this button belongs to component 6. So I'm triggering an action handler in component 6, and I'm filling a node in component 4. So that's how the external context node mapping works.